Hi, everybody. This is Jamie Cornelson, and I'm going to be going over case study number 2. A good teacher turns bad. Stress at home causes problems at school, which is standard 2. A brief summary. The principal, Mrs. Wilson, is having to deal with a personnel issue with Mrs. Horton. Mrs. Horton teaches first grade, and within the first 6 weeks of the school year is receiving complaints from parents about her treatment of children, late arrivals at school, as well as a refusal to hold parent-teacher conferences upon request. So category 1 is to identify and analyze the problem. I looked at what I know, and I know that Mrs. Horton is a former Teacher of the Year in the district, as well as a seasoned professional. Mrs. Wilson noticed a change in Mrs. Horton's attitude and behavior after spring break of last year. And according to Mrs. Horton's colleagues, she was having a rough time at home adjusting to her husband moving out and her being left to care for her 2 teenage sons. Some things that I need to know, according to Mrs. Horton, what does she believe does she believe there's a problem in her personal life that is interfering with her ability in the classroom? According to Mrs. Wilson, she has visited with Mrs. Horton's classroom regularly, and she has found no evidence of abusive behavior, making it hard to prove or disprove that this is happening. And how can this be handled? And finally, something we need to know, 4 parents have contacted board members concerning Mrs. Horton and her behavior toward their children. And how will this be communicated with Mrs. Horton? So I looked at a plan of action, and the first thing I would do is arrange a conference with Mrs. Horton. I would begin this meeting by pointing out all the positives that I can find with her. Sometimes those are hard to identify, but I think that's a really important step. I would give her the opportunity to share any difficulties that she's been having either at home or in her working environment. And then I would just start to share my concerns. Some of those being her absence over the summer, her resistance to the reading program, and then following the conference, she did not change or discourage her behavior in how she was treating the teachers who were in favor of that. And then the concerns that are in the classroom, the verbal abuse, screaming, refusal to hold parent-teacher conferences, and then I would let her know that there have been 4 calls made to the superintendent. And then I would address her behavior in the meeting with Mr. Stafford. I would point out that she was not prepared for the meeting when she had to go over to her desk and get some paperwork, and she also was not professional. I would hold this meeting after school, so there would be ample amount of time and minimal distractions. After our initial meeting, but within 48 hours, I would schedule a second meeting to develop a plan of action for dealing with the situation. I think this would give Mrs. Horton and myself time to kind of analyze things and process our feelings and our thoughts and what was shared in that meeting. And we would both want to contribute to the plan. It would include but not be limited to the following. I would want for her to evaluate her classroom management procedures. I think this is a way that we could reduce the yelling and the belittlement of children. And I would introduce to her Conscious Discipline by Becky Bailey. That is just a behavior management strategy that we use in our program, and I've seen it be very successful. I would review her duty times and the importance of arriving on time to work. I would discuss the parent issue and have her agree to meet with all the parents, and this would need to include an agenda of things that they were going to discuss and her plan for addressing any of their concerns. And then I would also notify her that I would be attending some of these conferences unannounced so that she could be expecting me to be in and out. I would talk about professional code of conduct and dealing with parents, and then just open it up to any and all suggestions or ideas that she would like to add to the plan. Again, I would do this after school to reduce distractions, and following this meeting, we would schedule a follow-up meeting in 5 days to just talk about progress and see if there's any additional assistance that she needs from me. I would also point out that I was going to make time to spend in her class throughout the school day. I think this is the only way that you can really gauge progress, and it would also give me the opportunity to make any additional suggestions. After this meeting, within 4 weeks of our initial meeting, I would again sit down with Mrs. Horton and see how things were progressing. At this point, my expectation would be that all the parent-teacher conferences had been completed, and I would communicate that with her, and we would discuss any and all concerns that the parents had or that she had at this time. And then I would just evaluate each of these items. How is the classroom management going? What have you changed? What's been helpful? Things like that. I would check in on how she's feeling about making it to work on time and see if that's helping her just throughout her day to give herself some time to get organized before the children arrive. Again, I would attend some of those conferences and just follow up on any of those concerns that parents had, and then we would just discuss anything else that she had added to the plan or maybe things that have come up since. And at this time, I would determine with the help of Mrs. Horton if and when our next follow-up would need to occur. If we were meeting, everything we needed to in these meetings, then I would have another meeting in 30 days, but be open to meeting sooner if she so desired. So these are just some things that I think are really important during the whole plan of action process. I would document all communication with Mrs. Horton and have her sign off on meeting notes and plans and etc. This would just cover myself as well as Mrs. Horton. I would encourage Mrs. Horton to seek the help of our Employee Assistance Program, which is offered through district insurance, and just encourage her, if she is having issues at home with her family and she feels like maybe counseling support could help, then that is a service that's available to her and that she should take advantage of. And finally, I would just let her know that through the whole process, I want what's best for her in her personal and professional life. With her past experience of being a Teacher of the Year, I know she has the ability, but we just need to figure out exactly what's causing these problems and get it taken care of. So things that I was thinking, feeling, and valuing. In assuming the role of an administrator, I had the following thoughts. Action steps would require Mrs. Horton and I to have an established relationship because none of what we would be talking about would be easy. And in order for her to grow and remedy the situation, I would have to be very open and honest and straightforward in my communication with her. So it just reaffirms to me the importance of establishing rapport in order to have these tough conversations. Collecting thorough documentation, again, would be critical. In the event that the plan of action was unsuccessful or not followed, or if we needed to continue, it would be important and necessary to identify every account of what had been done on both my end and what Mrs. Horton's follow-through was to remedy the situation. And then this would just help support any formal evaluations that might be necessary in the future, or refute why I didn't head in that direction if it was not needed. And finally, in this situation, I would want to focus on things I could control. It could be tempting to listen to the accusations of the verbal abuse to the students, but unless I witness it, it's not something that I can control. So in dealing with the parents of the students, I would grant Mr. Stafford his request to have his daughter moved because of the damage and the lack of trust in that relationship. I just don't think it would be healthy for the child or Mrs. Horton to continue to have that student in her class. And then as for the other students, I would just work with Mrs. Horton to repair and rebuild those relationships. I would explain all of this to Mrs. Horton and just encourage her, to work on those relationships with those parents. And again, open lines of communication will either make or break this situation, in my opinion. So some unresolved issues. Again, we don't really know the cause of Mrs. Horton's dissatisfaction, and we're not sure if she'll be able to make a break in her personal life and not allow it to interfere with her professional life. We don't know, will this plan work for her? Is it enough? And is she willing to put in the time and effort necessary to carry out the steps? And finally, will she be receptive to the help that's offered by myself? Will she take advantage of the emergency assistance program? And will she reach out to colleagues who might be able to help her as well? These are all questions that we just can't determine at this time. So standard 2 is instructional capacity. An educational leader promotes the academic success and personal well-being of every student by enhancing instructional capacity. So how did I promote the academic success of every student? Well, I think by addressing the personal issues Mrs. Horton's dealing with at home and helping her to remedy the situation, I'm creating an environment where children feel loved and secure. According to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this must be present before any academic learning can take place. So I think that really is promoting the academic success. And then again, by looking at behavior management and conscious discipline, Mrs. Horton's going to learn some strategies to calm herself and learn that control does not come through force. And by addressing these safety concerns, we will be promoting academic success. And how am I promoting the personal well-being of every student? By developing and following through on the action plan, I'm working to remedy the situation in order to ensure the well-being of all the children in the classroom. By moving Mr. Stafford's daughter, I'm doing what I feel is in the best interest for that family as well as Mrs. Horton. And finally, by immersing myself in Mrs. Horton's classroom, I feel like I'll be able to get a better feel for the environment and the classroom, just to make sure that all students are safe and secure. And the final component is how am I enhancing instructional capacity? Again, by spending a large amount of time with Mrs. Horton and her class during the school day, I will be able to know how that's functioning, the overall demeanor of both the students and Mrs. Horton. This will ensure that instructional learning is occurring in a calm environment. And in addition, by providing Mrs. Horton professional development and behavior management and any other areas Mrs. Horton feel would be helpful, I am enhancing her instructional capacity. And finally, by encouraging her to seek professional help to adjust her mental health and create a break in her personal life and professional life. This will allow her the ability to have those trusting relationships that have to be present with students to increase their capacity to learn.